All right. Brent, thank you for your help. We want to document how to write the PHP code to extract data from a database and display it as we see on the left. It's for the trading card e-commerce site. Okay, Brent, take it away.
All right. So the way this works is we're pulling data from a database. And like you guys have likely done in Scratch, we're using like an iteration. So for every record we have in the database inside the table, we're going to display some HTML. So every time it loops for every record, it's going to display the same HTML, except for some parts are dynamic. And those parts are being filled in with values from the database table. So over on the right side, we have a PHP file. This is going to be in a zip folder for you. And currently, this is inside of a folder on iPage where this is hosted. As you see, these are pulling in, and these are dynamic. The way we got to this point was we had the HTML file first. Then we modified the HTML file once we loved how it looked, the structure was correct. And we started swapping out some of the static pieces with dynamic code. So as you guys know from previous lessons, the PHP is the server-side code, and that starts down here at line 63. Everything above this is this part. So that would be like the navigation, anything that's up here. So none of this is dynamic right now. Ultimately, that will probably be moved into a PHP file to be included, but that's a topic for next time. Below that is where our code to connect to the database begins. So here are some variables. These variables are used for the database connection. You need username, password, and the database name. So as we scroll down a little bit further, and also feel comfortable to read the notes. The comments we have inside the code really do a great job at explaining it if you get lost. So then down here, we have a variable called MySQL. This is a command built into PHP that works with MySQL. And basically what we're doing is we're connecting to the database host. So this is our iPage server. And that's just basically saying connect to that server. Then we have the username, password, and the database name. In a way, think of that like logging into a social media account or email account. You need your username and password. When you go to visit a website where you have to log in, you still have to type in the domain, like facebook.com, tiktok.com, gmail.com, right? So the host is the domain, essentially. These are the credentials. And this almost tells you where to navigate to, like it's telling you which database to pick. So once this executes, well, this is just set in a variable. Once this gets, basically this does the connection, but down here where we have the if condition, it's going to check if there's any errors. So when it goes to connect, if it has an error, and that's kind of what this is saying here, it will just display this, and exit means it's going to stop executing the code. So basically you're going to get a page with whatever's above it, and when you get to this part, if there's a problem, it's going to display an error message. Now in a production environment, you can actually hide the errors. So if something goes wrong, you can debug it, but users won't see it. But especially right now, while we're working on building the app, we need to see these errors. No one's looking at it from the public at this point. So that's not a problem. Now, as we go down a little further, here you'll see query equals. So this is using like SQL, and this is basically the way that we're looking through the database and how we're pulling out records. Now, just as a quick reminder, let me go full screen over here, and I'm just going to go over to PHP MyAdmin, just so you guys can see this, kind of where that code comes from. And bear with me. Here is database. Here we go, MySQL database. So I'm just going to log into the PHP MyAdmin panel, which is here. You guys don't have to remember like this so much. The code's kind of already in place. But if I want to do anything with SQL queries, I just can go over to any database, any table we have. And if I click on browse, it's going to show me what's inside of it, but it's also going to show me the SQL query that's used to pull this data. Now, my favorite part about PHP MyAdmin is it will actually write the queries for you. You can even click on create PHP code and it will give you something very similar to what you see in the code. And just as if this gets too much, don't worry. As you go, you'll learn more and more. But if we say something like, let's see, artist, let's say John. So if we search for records only where the artist equals John, it will also give us that query. Select, the asterisk means all, from whatever table you're in, where, that's a condition, a column, where we would have a value, and then how it's going to compare it. Is it exactly equal to, is it like it, is it between? There's different values that could be here, and then the string or the number. So this code, if you plug that into PHP and ran this query, you would get the data that's displayed down below. So without diving too deep into that, whenever you see something like this, it's kind of hard to remember exactly the syntax, but we have a graphic user interface tool that produces that code for us, which is great. So this query, basically this will be run down below. So if there is a result for running a query command to look through the database, if this basically it pulls this SQL query and puts it in here, and then it executes it to pull the data in. If there is a result, you continue into the if statement and you will execute what's inside of it. If no results are found, there's not an error, there's no problem. It just will basically skip everything in between the brackets. So here we see the table is called trading cards. So if you look in the database, you'll see that there's a table called trading cards, and we're just pulling all the data in. If any of you guys think, hey, should we be pulling all the data in or should we be more specific? You can specify the exact columns you want. And what I've noticed with database queries, the more specific and the lighter you are, the better. But that's a lot more code for us to write while we're learning. So just using this asterisk gives us access to every single column. And for the most part, we're using those columns. So in this instance, it's not a problem. But if you're building a bigger app and there's multiple tables and you have something that's big as a social network, you can dramatically improve performance by being more precise with your queries. So inside this if statement, you'll see there's a while loop. So essentially, what we're doing up here, we set result to the information pulled from the query, but that shows up as an array, right? So an array, without trying to get too confusing here, isn't an object you can just display the values of. If you do, it looks really weird. What you want to do, an array basically holds each record as its own piece of the array. And if you loop through and you specify the variable row equals the result, this means it's going record by record. So everything contained inside of this bracket. So right now we're inside the if, we have a result. Then we're inside of our loop. So each result is being separated and we're executing some code for each individual result, each record. Now, this is where we're going to start setting the columns. Oh, wow. And John, don't beat me up here. We got to do spaces, not tabs, right? So here's a good example there. So with that, we're setting variables, and I should have explained it above, but whenever you see a $ and then a text string like that, next to each other, that stands for a variable in PHP. When we throw in the equal signs, that means we're setting the variable, just like in Scratch, where you say, set a variable to something. And this data here is coming from the column inside the table. So if I just quickly switch over to here, you'll see that we have card ID, card name. Let me go full screen for a moment. Card description, card front, card back, author, category. So over here, we have card ID, name, description, front, back, author category. These mirror essentially the columns that we have in the database table. So after that, we're going to start executing some things a little differently. This closes a PHP tag. This opens it. So just like with a title tag or a heading, an H tag, a div tag, you open and close it. Same with PHP. But one thing that's weird here is that we close it before we finish the loop, right? So we're inside the if, we're inside the while, and then we break the PHP code. The cool thing with doing that is you can actually display plain vanilla foreign HTML there. And then you can inject values into it and it still occurs during the loop. So rather than doing these, as you see here, these echo commands, I didn't want to use an echo command for every single line. I'd rather just have some standard HTML. And as we need to, we'll just open PHP, echo or variable. Echo is basically like printing it or displaying it, returning it. Granted, in PHP, echo, print, and return are all technically different things. Again, we can deal with that later. But this just basically says at this spot in the code, we're going to grab this variable and whatever its value, we're just going to print it as just whatever text strings or numbers, whatever symbols are there, that's what comes out. So if we were to look over here, right, this is the image. And this, I'm assuming, is the front. Yeah, card front. So over here, if we look at card front, we see front-c1.png. If we look over here, right click and inspect this, we'll have a little pop-up, or we'll be, kind of off to the side in your browser. But we see images / front-c1.png. This doesn't say $ card front. But what's happening is this value is sucked into the loop, right? It's being pulled in from the query, assigned as a variable in our loop, and then our code is able to take that, and after the image is slashed, it just injects that text right there. Same for every other time you see this. This is the back of the card. Let's see where else. I think that is actually all we did so far. We didn't, I think, automate the like the author name and other stuff, categories and so on. But that's kind of where we got to. Then we finished, this is like the, I guess you would say this is the part of HTML that loops over and over again for the row. Once we're done with that, we open the PHP tag again, we close our loop, we free the result, we close the if statement. And now this while loop, just to kind of explain that, this is looping over and over again until it gets to the last record. Then we free the result once we're done with all the records, basically, disconnecting from the database or from, clearing this value. And then we close PHP again, right? This is just to end those tags that were open. Then we close our document. So essentially, this file opens with some static HTML, does a PHP MySQL query, grabs the values as an array. If there's results, for each result, we go into a loop, a while loop. We add the column values for each horizontal row, each record as a variable. We use some plain HTML, and then we're injecting these values using PHP. We end our loop, and we close up our document. And that's how this works.
Great, Brent. Brent, one question. How does the code know when there's no more data? How does it know to stop the loop?
I believe that's the magic law gnomes that they put inside of all the processors at the factories, John.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I actually don't know. I'm assuming what it does is it counts the number of results returned, and once it gets to the end, it stops. My guess is it's probably like a repeat until command inside of Scratch, except for it automatically knows the number within the command.
I see. Okay, great. So we'll stop the recording here and then let's regroup and see if we can make a list of questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, stop recording.